In the ancient capital of Pella, Macedonia, which was part of ancient Greece, the person who would become known as Alexander the Great was born. Due to the different calendar system used by the Greeks, his exact birth date is uncertain. However, most historians agree that his birth occurred on July 20th, 356 BCE. Alexander was the offspring of Philip II, the king of Macedon, and Olympias of Epirus, who was the most prominent among his 7 wives. Being a royal offspring, Alexander was cared for by a nurse in his early years. His education was overseen by private tutors, the first of whom was Leonidas, a relative. Leonidas, known for his strictness, instilled a strong academic discipline in the young prince. Don't forget to like and subscribe, as this is a small channel, and your engagement helps us to create more videos for you. Leonidas, an instructor in disciplines like mathematics, reading, and languages, was a key figure in the early education of Alexander. At about 7 years of age, Alexander began receiving training from Lysimachus of Acarnania, one of his father's generals. Lysimachus was tasked with teaching Alexander the ways of nobility, including skills in playing the lyre, horseback riding, hunting, and combat. A defining moment in Alexander's youth occurred when he was 10. A trader brought a horse to sell to his father, King Philip, but the horse was untamed and uncontrollable. As Philip was about to refuse the offer, young Alexander confidently stepped up, claiming he could tame the horse. Despite the risks involved, Alexander exhibited extraordinary determination and skill in mastering the horse, a feat that left even his father deeply moved and proud. Overwhelmed with emotion, King Philip tearfully remarked to his son, "My boy, you must seek a kingdom large enough for your ambitions." Admiring his son's courage and skill, Philip bought the horse for Alexander, who named it Bucephalus, meaning ox head. This horse became Alexander's loyal companion throughout his career, carrying him into numerous battles. Upon Bucephalus's death at the age of 30, Alexander honoured his beloved horse by founding a city in its name. Alexander's educational journey took a significant turn when he turned 13. King Philip enlisted Aristotle, the era's most renowned philosopher, to educate his son. Their classes took place in the Temple of Nymphs at Mieza, akin to a prestigious boarding school setting. Alexander, along with other noble children, received comprehensive education from Aristotle, covering subjects like religion, ethics, philosophy, arts, and logic. To show gratitude for Aristotle's role in shaping his son's intellect, King Philip not only rebuilt Aristotle's native town, Stagira, which he had previously razed, but also freed every slave in the town. As Alexander approached 16, he was entrusted with a major responsibility, marking a new phase in his path to greatness. When Alexander was 16, King Philip commenced a war against Byzantium, leaving Alexander in charge of Macedon's capital. This act was a significant demonstration of trust from the king. However, the Thracian Maedi, a group of European tribes, perceived this as an opportunity, thinking the kingdom vulnerable under a teenage ruler. Alexander, however, swiftly rose to the challenge. He decisively quashed the Thracian uprising, driving them out of their land. He then resettled the area with Greeks and renamed it Alexandropolis. Upon King Philip's return, he was highly impressed by Alexander's handling of the Thracian revolt. Acknowledging his son's capabilities, Philip entrusted Alexander with a small army to quell any minor uprisings within the empire. Over the following 3 years, Alexander accompanied his father in various military campaigns across Greek territories. During one such campaign against Perinthus, Alexander notably saved King Philip's life, further proving his valour and military prowess. Following their victories over Elatea and Amphissa, Alexander and his father, King Philip, faced a formidable challenge against the allied forces of Athens and Thebes. The pivotal confrontation occurred near Chaeronea in Boeotia. In this strategic formation, Philip led the army's right wing, while Alexander commanded the left wing, overseeing Macedonia's most distinguished generals. Their combined efforts led to a decisive victory over the Theban and Athenian armies, consolidating Philip's control over most Greek states and paving the way for the formation of a Hellenic alliance. With Greece largely united under his rule, Philip turned his ambitions towards the conquest of Persia, leaving Alexander to manage an increasingly vast empire. However, Domestic dynamics shifted when Philip married Cleopatra, Eurydice. This union posed a potential threat to Alexander's status as the primary heir, as Cleopatra was fully Macedonian, unlike Alexander, who was of mixed heritage. The birth of a son to Cleopatra could potentially displace Alexander in the succession line. During the wedding feast of King Philip and Cleopatra Eurydice, a drunken remark by Attalus, Cleopatra's uncle and one of Philip's top generals, ignited a fierce reaction from Alexander. Attalus, in his inebriated state, loudly wished for the quick birth of a legitimate heir from the union. Alexander, feeling insulted and provoked, confronted Attalus by dousing him with a drink and angrily questioning his own legitimacy. Feeling alienated and betrayed, Alexander and his mother Olympia departed from Macedon, initially travelling to Epirus. Alexander then moved on to Illyria, located in the Western Balkans, where he was received with the honours befitting a dignitary. In Macedon, Philip was disheartened by his son's departure and sent a messenger to convince Alexander to return. Despite the incident, Philip had no intention of replacing Alexander as his successor. However, even after Alexander's return, tensions between father and son remained palpable, hinting at underlying strains in their relationship. To solidify alliances, King Philip arranged a marriage for Alexander's younger brother, Philip Aridaeus. However, Alexander's friends, suspecting ulterior motives, convinced him that this was another attempt by the king to jeopardize his succession. Upon learning of these rumors, an infuriated King Philip expelled the instigators from the court. In October of 336 BCE, the royal court gathered in Aegae for the wedding of Alexander I of Epirus and Alexander's sister, Cleopatra of Macedon. During this event, King Philip was tragically assassinated by a bodyguard as he was entering the town's theatre. The motives behind the murder remain a mystery, but its outcome was unmistakable. Alexander, at the age of 20, ascended to the throne of Macedonia. Reeling from his father's death and aware of the looming threats to his rule, Alexander took swift and ruthless action. He executed his cousin Amyntas IV, along with 2 Macedonian princes from Lycinistis, to consolidate his power. He also ordered the execution of Attalus, the uncle of his stepmother Cleopatra. Olympias, Alexander's mother, perceived Cleopatra as a threat and was wary of the potential danger she posed in the wake of Philip's demise. Olympias, Alexander's mother, took drastic actions in the wake of King Philip's assassination. She orchestrated the deaths of Cleopatra, her daughter with Philip, and potentially harmed others, leaving them with lasting mental and physical impairments. Alexander was incensed by his mother's actions, especially the poisoning of his half-sister, whom he did not view as a threat. The sudden shift from Philip's stable reign to that of a young 20-year-old ruler prompted revolts from various states. Athens and Thessalonica, among others, sought to reclaim their independence. Despite recommendations from his advisors to take a diplomatic approach, Alexander was resolute in demonstrating his authority. He personally led a 3,000-strong force to quell the uprisings. The presence of Alexander leading his troops often dissolved resistance in the rebelling states. Those who did not yield were quickly subdued. As Alexander moved through the territories unified by his father, he received widespread acclaim. His decisive actions not only solidified his power, but also ensured a smooth transition from his father's reign to his own. After quelling a series of rebellions, Alexander aimed to prevent future uprisings. In his second year as king, he led his army eastward, subduing the Thracian tribes who had rebelled against him earlier and conquering the Triballi tribe. Alexander's kingdom had expanded to such an extent that handling uprisings became a strategic challenge. Quelling a rebellion in one region often sparked unrest in another. Understanding the need for a decisive display of power, Alexander focused on bringing the northern states under control before turning his attention southward. His target was Thebes, the sole southern state bold enough to rebel. Intent on making an example of Thebes to deter further resistance, Alexander's forces obliterated the city. In its place, he established a series of smaller settlements, repopulated with people from various regions. This brutal tactic effectively subdued all of Greece, bringing it firmly under Alexander's control. With Greece pacified, Alexander shifted his ambitions towards conquering Asia. To maintain stability in his homeland while he was away, he appointed General Antipater as the ruler, entrusting him with a substantial military force to manage the kingdom. In 334 BCE, Alexander commenced his ambitious campaign into Asia with a formidable force of 40,000 soldiers. His goal was the complete conquest of the Persian Empire, which he viewed as a divine entitlement. Unlike his father, Alexander eschewed diplomatic approaches, preferring to achieve his objectives through military might. The Macedonian army's first significant encounter in Persian territory occurred at the Battle of Granicus River. This natural barrier posed a challenge to Alexander's forces. The Persian army, led by Memnon of Rhodes, was strategically positioned around the river, awaiting the Greek onslaught. Although the Persian forces were smaller in number, Alexander initiated a bold, direct assault, using a classic wedge formation. Penetrating the center of the Persian line, the Macedonian army engaged in a fierce battle. In the ensuing chaos, Alexander himself was reported to have slain several Persian soldiers. He narrowly escaped a potentially fatal axe blow, managing to defend himself and continue the fight. The Greek army's numerical superiority and tactical use of the lance to counter the Persian javelin assaults ultimately tipped the scales in their favor at the Battle of Granicus River. The Persian forces were decisively defeated and forced to flee the battlefield. The battle resulted in approximately 4,000 Persian casualties, while Alexander's forces suffered around a tenth of that number. A significant number of Greek mercenaries, about 18,000, had fought for the Persians in this battle. Captured by Alexander's army, these mercenaries were deemed traitors by Alexander. In a harsh display of retribution, he ordered the execution of half of them and enslaved the remainder. Following this triumph, Alexander seized control of Sardis, the capital of the Persian province of Lydia. He then proceeded along the Ionian coast, where most towns greeted him as a liberator. He announced their freedom from Persian rule, allowing them to govern themselves as autonomous entities. Throughout his journey along the coast, the Persian navy sought to engage Alexander's forces. However, Alexander, preferring land battles, avoided naval confrontations, focusing on his terrestrial campaign. Continuing his journey south, Alexander encountered his first major siege at Halicarnassus. The city had become a strategic base for the Persian fleet. Queen Ada of Caria, originally the ruler of Halicarnassus, had been ousted and replaced by the Persian satrap, Orontobates. Ada retreated to the fortress of Alinda, but upon Alexander's arrival, she surrendered the fortress to him. The defenders of Halicarnassus prepared for a robust defense against Alexander's forces. Despite initial resistance and setbacks from the city's catapults, Alexander's army successfully breached the city walls on a second attempt. Memnon of Rhodes, who had previously escaped capture at the Battle of Granicus River and was defending the city, resorted to setting Halicarnassus ablaze before withdrawing. Following this, the Persian fleet also retreated. In a strategic move, Alexander restored control of the city to Queen Ada. In a reciprocal gesture, Ada adopted Alexander as her son, ensuring that the city would be inherited by him upon her death. This not only secured Halicarnassus for Alexander, but also strengthened his position in the region. After securing Halicarnassus and its coastal counterparts, Alexander effectively hindered the Persian navy's ability to dock. His campaign then led him to Gordium, the Phrygian capital, where he encountered the legendary Gordian knot. This complex rope knot, tied to an ox cart, was prophesied to grant the rulership of Asia to whoever could untangle it. According to legend, Alexander scrutinized the knot, but, unable to find a solution, resorted to slicing it in half with a swift sword stroke. The truth of this tale remains uncertain, but it endures as a symbol of Alexander's approach to problem-solving. Continuing southwards, Alexander and his army faced their toughest challenge yet, a larger and more formidable force led by Darius III, the king of the Achaemenid Empire of Persia. Despite being outnumbered, Alexander's strategic acumen and courage, particularly his practice of leading his troops from the front lines, were key factors in securing a victory against this formidable opponent. Darius III was utterly demoralized by his defeat, fleeing and abandoning his army, vast treasure, and his empire. Alexander swiftly claimed these spoils. In the wake of Alexander's overwhelming victory over the Persians, neighbouring nations grew increasingly anxious. Alexander's reputation as an unstoppable warrior king grew, leading many territories to submit to his rule as he advanced. By 332 BCE, he had conquered Syria and the coastal Levant. His next target was Tyre, a heavily fortified island city about a mile off the Mediterranean coast. The siege of Tyre posed a significant challenge for Alexander due to its maritime location and formidable defensive walls. Alexander's forces blockaded Tyre for 7 months, preventing any movement in or out. To breach the city, Alexander had his army construct a causeway from rocks, forming a path to the city walls. The prolonged resistance of Tyre greatly angered Alexander. When the walls were finally breached, according to the ancient historian Arrian of Nicomedia, Alexander's response was severe, resulting in the loss of thousands of Tyrian lives. After capturing Tyre, Alexander's reputation as a formidable conqueror led to many cities surrendering without a fight during his campaign. However, Gaza, strategically perched on a hill, presented a significant challenge. Its formidable walls, deemed by Alexander's engineers as too high and thick for breach, seemed to make a siege nearly impossible. Yet for Alexander, such a challenge only fueled his determination. Believing in his destiny to conquer, he led the Greek army in 3 arduous attempts to penetrate Gaza's defences. On their final effort, they achieved a breakthrough, albeit at a great cost. The siege resulted in heavy casualties, including a serious shoulder injury to Alexander himself. Following their victory, the city faced harsh retribution, with the male population killed and women and children sold into slavery. As Alexander's army advanced towards Jerusalem, the city, recognizing his unstoppable march, opened its gates in welcome, thereby averting conflict and integrating peacefully into Alexander's expanding empire. During Alexander's visit to Jerusalem, he was reportedly shown a passage from the Book of Daniel in the Great Temple of Solomon. This prophetic text described him as a great king destined to conquer vast lands. Moved by this, Alexander left Jerusalem unharmed and proceeded south towards Egypt. In Egypt, Alexander was greeted as a liberator. The Egyptians revered him as a divine figure, equating him with their pharaohs. Here, he founded the city of Alexandria, destined to become a significant trading hub in the future. Turning his attention to Babylon, the Persian capital, Alexander then headed north. In Babylon, King Darius had fortified his position. Alexander's forces numbered 47,000, while Darius reportedly assembled an army that some historians estimate to have been as large as 1 million men. The two armies clashed near the village of Gaugamela. Darius strategically positioned chariots equipped with scythes and 15 elephants at the front of his lines, hoping to break through the Greek phalanxes. Alexander countered this by deploying his light infantry at the forefront, using them to launch missile attacks aimed at the horses of the chariots, thus mitigating their impact. The chariots that breached the Greek lines during the battle were allowed to pass through, only to be encircled and neutralized. Darius III himself, aboard a scythe-armed chariot, was forced to flee when his charioteer was struck down by a javelin. Mounting a horse, he retreated from the battlefield, prompting many of his troops to do the same. This retreat sparked chaos within the Persian ranks, effectively sealing their defeat. After his victory at Gaugamela and the subsequent capture of Babylon, Alexander continued his conquests, advancing to Susa and then to Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire. Intent on eliminating any threat of resurgence, Alexander sought to capture Darius. However, upon finding him, Alexander discovered that Darius had already been killed by one of his own, Bessus, who then declared himself king. Undeterred, Alexander shifted his focus to pursuing Bessus, who had escaped into Central Asia. Throughout his journey, Alexander founded several cities, each named after himself, further imprinting his legacy across the continent. Ultimately, Bessus was betrayed by his followers and delivered to Alexander, who ordered his execution. Upon his return to Persia, Alexander was celebrated as the King of Kings. He began integrating Persian customs into his lifestyle, including wearing Persian attire and observing their traditions. This shift in cultural allegiance caused unease among many Greeks, including some of his generals. During this time, Alexander had been away from Macedon for an extended period. He had appointed Antipater to govern Macedon in his absence, who successfully maintained stability. However, Alexander's persistent demands for additional troops from Macedon strained the city's defences. Turning his ambition towards the Indian subcontinent, Alexander dispatched envoys to secure the submission of Indian rulers. While some complied, others resisted. Those who opposed Alexander faced fierce retribution, with entire villages being destroyed and inhabitants killed. In the Punjab region, Alexander's army encountered significant resistance led by King Porus. Despite defeating the Indian forces, Alexander was so impressed by Porus's strategic acumen and courage that he proposed a partnership. Alexander would retain sovereignty over the land, but Porus would be entrusted with its day-to-day governance. Alexander's conquests had made him the ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen, yet his thirst for expansion remained unquenched. He aspired to delve further into the Indian subcontinent, but his army, weary from years of campaigning, rebelled against this notion. They yearned for home, as expressed by General Coenus, who voiced the soldiers' desire to return to their families and homeland. Understanding their sentiments, Alexander agreed to return. However, during their journey back, he continued to subdue additional territories. In a move to alleviate the burden on his troops, Alexander sent the older and injured soldiers directly back to Macedonia. This gesture, intended as an act of compassion, instead fueled discontent among the ranks, who expected a complete return home. Further unrest brewed due to Alexander's embrace of Persian customs and the appointment of Persian officers. To appease his troops, Alexander ensured Macedonian leadership over Macedonian soldiers and organised a grand banquet to celebrate their victories. Back in Persia, he settled in Babylon's Grand Palace, plotting further campaigns into Arabia. But these plans were never realised. Alexander's life came to an abrupt end in June of 332 BCE, marking the close of his extraordinary reign. The circumstances of Alexander's death remain a topic of speculation, with two primary theories involving excessive alcohol consumption. According to one theory, he developed a fever after a prolonged drinking spree lasting 24 hours. Another suggests he fell ill following the consumption of a large quantity of undiluted wine. There were also rumours of possible poisoning. Alexander's untimely demise at the pinnacle of his power sent shockwaves across the world. His sudden passing was hard to comprehend, especially given his robust and dynamic persona. His remains were placed in a golden sarcophagus, and after considerable debate, entombed in Alexandria, attracting visits from numerous illustrious leaders over the centuries. However, the sanctity of his final resting place was disturbed on several occasions. Roman Emperor Augustus reportedly damaged the corpse accidentally, while Caligula is said to have taken Alexander's breastplate. These incidents led Emperor Septimius Severus to seal the tomb in 200 CE. The subsequent fate of the tomb is shrouded in mystery, and today, the exact location of Alexander's final resting place remains one of history's great unsolved enigmas.